Hey guys, I'm still here for now if you watched my last video about my family's health crisis. I've got much to share with you. First, you guys are an amazing and supportive community. I mean, so many of you have reached out to offer your support, and I'll get to this more as we close out. A lot to say there. I'm first going to make a few points about religious trauma, and then I'll give you guys an update on things around the channel and life in general. I'm going to bring your attention today to a phrase pastors, well, also apologists and theologians in general, sling around that sounds humble, pretty, and submissive, but it's a heat-seeking missile for those prone to suffering from religious trauma. We'll get to that in a second, but first, many of you know that I'm in a somewhat unique position as one who has left fundamental Christianity but still hunts the transcendent. I still attend a Christian fundamentalist church with my family, all of whom are still devoted believers. I do this willfully, and now more than ever, based on the health crisis my family is going through, I am getting an even better sense of how religious trauma can form in someone. And I'm again confronted by the cognitive dissonance that assaulted me back when the worst of my religious trauma set in, which was in 2011 when I was diagnosed with Charcot-Marie-Tooth, a progressive and degenerative neuromuscular disease. I think I'm again feeling the rise of despair, anxiety, and fear because I'm persisting in a triggering and what I would call a toxic environment. And while yes, it's unhealthy for me to keep going to church, to keep revisiting the scene of the crime, so to speak, I'm glad that I am because if nothing else, it's revealing more that I can share with you, and that I hope is benefiting you. Many of you are probably familiar with Jared Smith's Heliocentric channel, where he does atheist audits of churches to give you the lowdown on what he experienced there. Well, I guess I'm kind of doing the same thing, except I'm giving you religious trauma updates from inside the church. I do hope Christians watch this so they can begin to recognize the harm they're unwittingly doing. As a Christian, I certainly didn't or couldn't recognize what I'll share with you today for a majority of the 25 years as I was a Christian. It's a blind spot. For anyone new here, and I know many of you are new, welcome to the channel. I'm H.G.Roberts, deconverted Christian after 25 years and author of On Monsters and Phantoms. And here we talk about religious trauma and how the Bible itself ties us up in knots. It leads to confusion, anxiety, fear, doubt, depression, emotional oblivion, mental paralysis, and ultimately, of course, trauma. I have a master's degree in mass communication, so I'm specifically interested in the messages that the Bible communicates to us today, the cognitive filters in our minds that we use to interpret those messages, and finally, the harmful impact those messages have on ourself and our worldview. Here's a phrase, one of many, I wish Christians will stop saying. It does more harm than they know because nobody will call them on it. But man, does it trip people up, sometimes consciously and sometimes subconsciously. You guys can tell me what you think about this. The phrase is, by the grace of God. And my pastor has recently slung it around quite a bit in his sermons, repeating it several times, and it usually precedes something he's understandably thankful and grateful for. By the grace of God, we were able to pay that water bill last month when it didn't look like we could. By the grace of God, John and Sally's little baby boy came into the world healthy and happy last week. And the phrase we'll camp out on today that the pastor said, by the grace of God, I'm 65 and I am not on any medications and haven't had any health issues to date. This last one is especially relevant given the health crisis my family is facing as we speak. And so, when I hear the pastor say this, I'm deeply troubled. Here's the train of thoughts that used to go through my mind when I heard this right after getting my neuromuscular disease diagnosis, and that are now coursing through my mind as someone who has walked away from Christianity, but still am directly exposed to its messages. By the pastor claiming it's only by God's grace, his unmerited favor, that this great thing happened, or that God's sustained his health such that he certainly or currently doesn't need meds or medical care of any kind, the melancholic mind prone to OCD, rumination, and scrupulosity, perhaps one who's endured significant childhood or other trauma, pauses and reflects. The pastor was just bragging, and I know he wasn't perhaps trying to brag, but he's announcing God's favor over his life when many congregants, like me, are sitting in the pews wondering simply, well, where's God's grace in my life? Why don't I get to experience his favor when it comes to my health? Why has God singled this pastor out to bless him with good health while I or my loved one has been singled out to have a catastrophic, untreatable, and incurable illness, sometimes terminal? What am I doing wrong? Or what did I do wrong to incur God's wrath? What am I missing or not doing right enough to not merit God's grace or favor or blessings, at least in the area of health? How am I sinning such that I deserve God's wrath? It's not God's wrath, H.G. We live in a fallen world. Well, who sustains that fallenness, that fallen state, when it could have been corrected right from the start? And who cursed the world? If we're not receiving God's grace, we're receiving his what? His nothing? His passive indifference? No, his wrath, his merited punishment. There's no in-between in the binary biblical world. If you're declaring God's grace over you for an outcome as it relates to, say, your health, then someone dealing with a disease is only left to grapple with God's wrath as it relates to an unfavorable or negative health outcome. At any given moment, you're either receiving God's grace or his wrath. There's nothing else. There's nothing in between, biblically speaking. He can use a negative outcome to teach us, to lead us, H.G. It's a blessing in disguise. The blind man was so blind that Jesus could heal him and show his power. I break down the flaws in that scenario in this video. God uses negative outcomes to punish, and they're also indications of him removing his hand of blessing or grace. Essentially, negative outcomes are akin to curses, strictly speaking. God is a God of justice, and he exercises that justice through his unnecessarily excessive, brutal, savage wrath and punishment. Anyone who uses that phrase, by the grace of God, to precede some bit of random good news or blessing is teetering on a prosperity gospel, whether they know it or not. And my pastor, I know, has preached against such a heretical prosperity gospel, and I understand that the pastor is modeling thankfulness and gratefulness, that we should thank God for all good things, heck, maybe even the bad. But you never hear, by the grace of God, he saw fit to give me ALS or a glioblastoma. I mean, maybe you do. I know there are Christians who declare God's mercy and grace in affliction and trial, and I'm not saying that's unhealthy. We know that that type of positive, faithful outlook can and does benefit the one who's afflicted. I acknowledge that. But not everyone can do that, and there are so many reasons why that need to be addressed and understood. That's why my channel is here. As much as pastors think they're modeling how easy it is to say all good things are only provided by the grace of God, some of us immediately shut down, turn inward, and question God's goodness. And we are able to immediately search the scriptures to find that what we're experiencing through a disease diagnosis or other hardship is obviously God's wrath and punishment. Scriptures abound that prove that what we're experiencing is not God's favor, but his wrath. Even with Job, that story never brought me peace and comfort, only more questions, or even the fear that God stepped aside so that Satan could torment me and destroy my life. Remember, to the sexually abused as children, reading a story where God willfully allows his nemesis, but really we know that at that time Satan was on God's heavenly council, so deal with that, evangelicals. God willfully allows his nemesis, a predator meant to harm and destroy, to attack you while he sits back and watches, then chastises you for asking questions? That's not healthy in any way, shape, or form. This phrase, by the grace of God, demonstrates that God's default is to not bless, to not help, to not support, to not heal, to not deliver, to not provide. And if it weren't for God's grace, that unmerited favor to do things we don't deserve, forgetting what we don't deserve, we'd be screwed. Think about the very definition of grace, which Christians fall all over themselves in glee proclaiming. we're getting what we don't deserve. Baked into that very definition is a stark reminder of how undeserving we are just because we exist, how flawed, unworthy, and sinful, and ugly, and disgusting we are to God from birth, tainted by original sin, which was and always has been God's idea. It's a reminder of how much God actually hates us, hates everything about us, and unless he demonstrates grace, which he may or may not, and if he does, it's quite possibly in inconsistent measure that he never has to explain to us, we're all hell-bound. And as easily as he can provide that grace, one slip and he'll remove it. I know many Christians don't see it this way, but when you have traumatic childhood experiences and you have a melancholic temperament and you're diagnosed with a debilitating disease that strips you of the very thing you built your life around because you believe that's what God called you to do, it is impossible to sense the grace of God, especially when the Bible is so full of scriptures where God's wrath far outweighed his grace. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross doesn't fix this. Why? Because even when you've accepted it, you can, through religious trauma and self-preservation, reject it, meaning you're now destined for hell. And all that grace God once poured out on you was conditional. Even though he promises to complete the good work he began in you, God can remove his grace just as readily as he provides it, and it's always your fault if he does remove it. If grace were truly real, you couldn't reject it. God couldn't withhold it. It's unmerited favor. You don't deserve it. It shouldn't ever be conditional. Grace should keep on delivering the goods, literally and spiritually, but it doesn't. It's a flame that should never be extinguished. It becomes something other than grace if God can choose to remove it, especially through something you've done, which makes no sense. If you didn't deserve it in the first place, and in your sinful nature God chose to bestow grace upon you, how could your sin ever remove it, even the sin of rejecting God? But the Bible is clear that God removes his grace. Hebrews makes it clear that it's impossible to be restored to grace, to salvation, to sanctification, and justification once you've fallen away. How utterly sad, how utterly awful is a God that once accepted you, saved you, gave you his Holy Spirit to dwell within you, but won't chase after you after you've strayed away from the flock like he promises to do. You know, that whole one straying sheep from the 99 story? This health crisis has just brought all this into sharp relief for me, so I'm talking to you guys about it while it's fresh and raw. Just one slip, one act of defiance or disobedience, regardless if forgiveness is asked for, could and does bring God's wrath, his removal of grace, even if he forgives you for the act. Ananias and Sapphira is our best example of this, and it's why I keep citing it. Saying by God's grace is an acknowledgement that you're right on the precipice of catastrophe, that you're an inch away from having that grace removed if he so chooses, and we know that he chooses to remove his grace, because some Christians do get terminal health diagnoses early in life, while you, pastor, don't need any medications and barely have to go to your doctor. It's not God's grace, by the way. It's genetics. You're lucky. Call it luck, not grace. Calling it grace opens a door to trauma you don't even know exists. Then the pastor goes on, like he did this past Sunday, to talk about how people's faith can either get shipwrecked, which was his word, or grow through trials of many kinds. And the people who get shipwrecked, he claimed, didn't have enough faith or weren't properly exercising their faith, and they're the ones who fall away from the faith because of hardship or trial. And I'm sitting there thinking, how short-sighted, how cliche, how dangerous. Spend 5 minutes with the stories about religious trauma of those people with great faith who, like Job, spiral into agony, confusion, and questions. Here's why Job doesn't bring comfort. How does God respond to Job when he rightfully and respectfully asks God for insight? Remember, Job, by God's own declaration, was a righteous man. Why wouldn't God commune in civil and amicable fellowship with him, especially after God pegged him for destruction after making a bet with Satan? But instead, God belittles Job, dismisses him. God's anger burns against him. I don't care that Job eventually got new kids, new land, and new animals. God treated him horribly from start to finish. Remember, not every faithful Christian gets restored in this life after a God-allowed attack or catastrophe. So this story isn't a universal panacea for challenged faith. And I can assure you, if God took my kids away right now, I'm 54 with a neuromuscular disease, I don't know that I'd want new kids, perhaps for God to take away again. Who knows with this God? I'm too old for new kids, and I'd be so psychologically damaged from the first round of torment, my kids being killed, that the last thing I'd want to do is go another round. If you're a parent of, say, 4 kids, ages 3 to 17, and all of them died by God or really Satan's hand, how quick would you want 4 new kids now that you're 54, slowing down, maybe even diseased? How quickly would you forget about your 4 dead kids and be able to just frolic ahead with 4 new ones? Put yourself in Job's shoes, not just the faithful shoes, but the pragmatic reality shoes as well. I don't know. You tell me how that would actually work. I'm not trying to be critical of Job. I know some Christians, heck, even me for a time, find great encouragement and wisdom in this story. I didn't try to see it this way. It became this way, after I was diagnosed with a debilitating disease. Job claiming that God gives and takes away didn't lead me to a deeper faith, but rather a debilitating fear, one that I wrestled desperately against until it was either suicide or walk away. And there are solid empirical, cognitive, and rational reasons for this that have nothing to do with demons. I didn't expect to end up in Job territory with this video, but I suppose it was unavoidable and inevitable given the topic. Let me know if you guys have any other phrases that trigger you and drive you into doubt, fear, or questioning your faith. Or what other phrases drove you from the faith? Maybe I'll do a video on different ones or combine them into one video. And now to close out. Thank you all again so much for your outpouring of love and support to my family and me. You guys have lifted me up. You have no idea how much I need you guys through this crisis. So many have wished me well and told me how much the channel has impacted you guys. And that is so encouraging. I've heard from people around the world. I need you guys more than you know. And don't close this video yet. Hear me out till the end. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for me, making these kinds of in-the-moment reaction and reflection videos, I think is helpful, maybe even therapeutic in a way. It helps me process because honestly, I can see how easily it is to let those old fears overwhelm me and drive me back into nihilism. My promise to you guys is that I'm going to build off what I've learned, what so many of you have taught me, even some of you Christians, and I'm going to move forward. I'm taking you along on my journey through the present difficulties, which are real and deep. I hope you're okay with that, and please let me know if any of this is triggering for you, and I'll amend my message, okay? I have a few people to thank for purchasing my memoir on Monsters and Phantoms, again, which is my story through severe religious trauma and deconversion from Christianity. So thanks, Apatim, Patrick 764, and Mark Shearis. I hope I'm saying that right. I appreciate you all purchasing the book. I've got a ton of reader reviews on my website on monstersandphantoms.com, so you can get a sense of what you're in for if you buy the book. More than ever, I am grateful for your financial support because the out-of-pocket medical expenses have piled up already beyond what we can afford, and we're only in the early stages of this crisis, so every bit of income helps. And on that note, you guys, I've made a new friend in this agnostic atheist space, Cody of Peel the Onion channel. Cody, after hearing about what my family is going through, wasted no time to set up a GoFundMe page out of the goodness of his heart. Below in the description, I've linked to that page and the support video he recently made for me. So if you are able to help with a large or small donation, I appreciate that so much. And please head over to Cody's channel and check it out, and please subscribe. He's got a young channel, kind of like mine, and he's hunting for truth just like me, and he's asking great, thought-provoking questions about Christianity and belief. He's got an incredible mind, but a bigger heart. So please head over to his channel and show him some love, because he showed it to me and my family without me asking, and that's what community is all about. Okay, gang, I'll try to be back Sunday with another video. I think I will. I think it's going to be a response video on what Alex O'Connor recently said about Christianity becoming more plausible to him. So look for that one. So much in my mind to share with you guys and get your feedback on. It's just a matter of having the time to record stuff in the midst of everything, and also having, well, the mental clarity to say something sensible, or at least what I hope is sensible. So until then, I love y'all.